part of a broader plan for providing energy services to the campus. It's also a key part of the university's plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, specifically by 55% by 2030. That's our overall target. And the plant would greatly increase energy efficiency and also help to meet that target. However, it also runs on natural gas, and so it's definitely not a black and white issue. And like most sustainability issues, there are trade-offs involved. So there's been some questions about why the university has chosen this plan and about the decision-making process that was followed. So we wanted to help provide an opportunity for information and questions and discussion about this. So Sustainability Institute is hosting 2 sessions. This one today is for faculty. We're hosting one tomorrow evening for student leaders, and both are going to be recorded. Both will be posted online, so if anyone who can't attend now or tomorrow can listen later. We've also posted a number of links to, for example, direct testimonies that were part of the Ohio Power Siting Board's regulatory process, as well as an FAQ document that has a lot of the kind of basic questions and answers regarding this. And let me just post that in chat right now, so you guys, that was a link that was distributed earlier in an email, but I also just posted it in chat in case you need it. So I encourage you to check that out. In addition to several faculty with energy systems expertise for joining today, I also want to thank Scott Potter and Mike Sheldon for joining us. Scott is Senior Director from the Comprehensive for Ohio State. He is the Senior Director of Comprehensive Energy Management with the Office of Business and Finance. His primary responsibility is for the oversight of Ohio State's University Energy Partnership Agreement. He's also charged with ensuring that the university's energy profile is as efficient and affordable as possible, while also achieving the university's sustainability goals. Mike Shelton is with the Sustainability Institute. He's our Associate Director. He manages the Ohio State Sustainability Fund and supports the work of the President and Provost Council on Sustainability. He serves as a project manager for a number of sustainability-related projects on campus that are advancing Ohio State's operational sustainability goals. And he played an instrumental role in supporting the development of the university's climate action plan that was announced earlier this year. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and ask him to give us a brief update and overview of the university's decision to pursue the CHP facility, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Just in terms of process, I'd like to ask that everyone just keep themselves on mute and let Scott provide an overview, and then once we get to the Q&A portion, feel free to unmute to ask a question. And then mute yourself again, just so we control background noises and the such. If you prefer to post a question in chat, you can do that. We'll try to monitor chat and pick up questions that way as well. And just, I would ask that you just be considerate of other speakers. I mean, we're keeping this pretty informal and casual. So, you know, if you find yourself speaking at once with other people, just try to be considerate, let people, we would really like for this to be an opportunity for everyone to have an opportunity to ask their questions. If we do run out of time, I think we're scheduled to go until 1:45, but if we do run out of time, you know, and you think you're not going to get a question answered, feel free to put it in chat, and we will save the chat. We'll post answers to any new questions that aren't already covered in the FAQ. We'll post those on our website. So with that, let me turn it over to Scott, and Scott, I'll ask you to provide an overview in maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll go backwards from most recent. On the 17th of September, the Ohio Power Siting Board approved the construction of our proposed combined heat and power plant. That was the culmination of a nearly a year-long application process with the state. Leading up to that application, though, the university had been investigating the potential benefits of a CHP plant for about the last 12 to 15 years. And it was always the sort of the CapEx, the upfront costs that shied us away from it. With the energy partnership and a new analysis of both the economics, the environmental benefits, and really the operational benefits, it became possible to consider that again. In 2017, we asked the company to produce a feasibility study. They did a detailed analysis of multiple cases, if you will. Ultimately, the university in 2018, the board approved going forward with the application of the Power Siting Board. We are slated for construction to begin October 15th, weather permitting and pending one final sign off from the city regarding the laydown area. But I think that's the logistics in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Before we open it up for questions, I know that one of the basic questions is just how did the university arrive at the decision of wanting to build a CHP facility? And can you just provide maybe a high-level overview of the different options that the university was considering?
Sure. Our primary, way back even when we first started thinking about this a dozen years or so ago, our primary issue was the need for a very large, massive thermal demand. In the summer, at the university's current level in the summer, we need about 100,000 pounds of steam per hour. That's in the summer on the hottest day. In the winter, current demand is about 500,000 pounds of steam per hour. We expect that demand to go up with the construction of the new ambulatory and proton therapy unit on West Campus and the new hospital tower on Central Campus. Additionally, over the last few years and most recently since we started the partnership, we have been converting where possible buildings from high pressure superheated steam to heating hot water, which tends to be more efficient all around. It's cheaper to produce it, it's cheaper to transport it, there are less losses. So that's sort of, the campus load and demand as it stood. And when we looked at how can we meet growing demand, both thermal and electrical going forward, we were looking at McCracken Power Plant, which is extremely aged. All of the boilers in there are simple gas-fired boilers. The only thing we get from those boilers is steam. The waste heat is exhausted through the stacks. And those boilers are nearing the end of their useful life. So we looked at various options, and the only sort of campus-wide technology we found that was feasible from an engineering and a financial point of view was combined heat and power. And what that really did for us was allow us to burn gas that we were going to have to burn anyway for steam, and also get electricity out of it. So the configuration of the CHP plant will produce the steam we need. It will allow us to begin to retire McCracken boilers. In fact, the day we turn the CHP plant on, one boiler will come offline entirely from McCracken, and McCracken will drop from essentially 100% load to closer to a 15% load almost right away. So now when we burn the gas through a steam generator, we will get electric. We will capture the waste heat. The waste heat will produce additional it will produce either more electricity, or it will be used to produce process heat, steam and or heating out water, depending on where that particular energy is going. The buildings on West Campus will start as heating hot water buildings. We'll begin converting the buildings on the Midwest, the ag and vet med buildings. Over time, we'll convert those to heating hot water. And as soon as Cannon Drive is done, the CHP plant will reach back across to Central Campus and create a heating and cooling loop that goes from Central Campus all the way to West Campus. It will also provide a power redundancy by connecting back to the Buckeye substation on Cannon Drive, so that for the first time, the university will be able to entirely island in the event of a grid outage. The CHP plant will be capable of powering not just our med center, but most of campus for an extended period of time. So that was really the process. When we looked at the numbers, the conservative estimate was net present value on the selected model over the life cycle was more than $100 million. And that's very conservative. We assumed no growth in campus. We assumed that the only buildings on West Campus would be the 3 that we're putting up now. We assumed no export to the market. So we try to be as very conservative as possible. And we also assumed that the price of electricity and natural gas would separate. You know, for years and years, they've been sort of tied together, but we assumed that natural gas prices would go up and electric prices would go down to still make the test that it was financially viable. And so it comes out pretty positive. So that was sort of the process. When NG OSEP came on board, they had the capital. So all of a sudden the issue of, the $200 million necessary to build a plant like this was not an issue. Now we only had to think about the payback over the life cycle.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to ask you one more question because I know this is on people's minds, and then I will let others ask questions. I think the biggest one of the biggest questions is just, what may have been true 2, 3, 5 years ago is no longer true, which is there's been a remarkable transition in terms of renewable energy becoming much more commercially viable, scalable, and affordable. We're in a different spot than we were even a few years ago in terms of that. And so why is it that the university is going forward with this decision, given the rapidly changing landscape in the renewable energy systems?
Yeah, I completely agree. Even though it's rapidly changing, I'll note that still less than 3% of Ohio's delivered energy is from wind or solar sources. It's about 30 to 40% coal. It's about 35% nuclear and about 28 to 29% natural gas. So we're still quite a ways away from available, affordable renewable electric on the scale we need. But the most important thing for us was that we were trying to solve a thermal issue, not an electrical issue. So we needed new thermal capacity. We have albeit very old and outdated high pressure superheated steam system, but that's what we have. It's a legacy system. And the cost to sort of abandon it in place, whole cloth, abandon the whole thing and replace it is both prohibitively expensive and operationally difficult, especially for an urban campus like Ohio State. So we had this thermal need for our growing demand. And what the CHP provided was a solution to our thermal need and the benefit of significantly reducing the amount of power we buy from the grid.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and just ask anyone who would like to step in with a question, just feel free. I mean, we've got, I think, a manageable number of people. So just, again, if you would like to ask a question, go ahead and unmute to ask the question and then mute again so that we can deal with background noises and allow others to ask questions. While you're thinking about questions, let me just clarify. Enrico did ask in the chat about recording it, and I understand the concern, but I had already promised that we would record because I know there are people who are teaching now who really wanted to be listening and learning, and so I think at this point we're gonna go forward with the recording, If that's uncomfortable for anyone, I apologize. But I think it's, at this point, given the promises I made, I feel that we do need to do that.
Well, I can start with a question if you like.
Yeah, go for it.
I think we understand that this decision is driven mostly by cost, right? And there's been some discussion of the fact that it's improving the carbon footprint, but not much really. I mean, the reality is that natural gas as an energy system massively leaks methane into the atmosphere. And therefore, it's just not true that it has a major carbon footprint advantage over coal. And so in the long term, the question is how in the long term do we resolve financial concerns, which have been driving the process so far, but also address like the moral issue of not being part of a system that is just destroying our climate system. How do we go green from here?
It's a great question, Mike, and I appreciate all aspects of that question. What I might ask is maybe if Mike, if you could just give us a little bit of insight into climate action plan and what is the plan for scaling up on renewables? Where are we now, and what's the plan as we move forward?
Sure.
Mike, yeah, you're a little faint. I'm not sure I could hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There
Can you
you
hear
are.
me now?
That's better. Yep.
Well, it's certainly a big question, and obviously a question that's much larger than Ohio State in itself in trying to achieve thermal or renewable-based thermal energy needs. You know, the Climate Action Plan outlines a number of ways we can increase renewables into our portfolio, and that really builds off of the work that Scott and others at the university have already done to incorporate renewables that we are currently utilizing. I'm sure all of you know that we purchase a significant amount of wind energy from the Blue Creek Wind Farm in Northwest Ohio. That's somewhere between 15 and 17% of our overall electricity. But the Climate Action Plan outlines, additional on-site as well as off-site purchase of renewables to help meet that gap that Scott referenced, between what the CHP will produce and what the campus demand actually is. So there's continued contemplation on how to incorporate renewables into our wider portfolio. Regardless of the CHP, we're going to have that thermal issue where, regardless of how much renewable energy, electricity we purchase, we're still going to have the thermal component that is really tough to deal with. And, I think that the Climate Action Plan contemplates where there's opportunities to do so, incorporating geothermal, and Scott's obviously already mentioned additional heating hot water as opportunities, but those are going to be kind of individual site-specific opportunities, and really difficult to get a campus-wide system that's powered with those two components. So we're going to have to look at fuel switches, and the CHP enables that in the future, whether that's renewable natural gas, which is currently available but cost prohibitive, and there is some questions about the environmental impact of renewable natural gas. But then we have to work ourselves and with other research partners to find new energy sources that can provide thermal needs and fuel our plant with that. And we certainly contemplate hydrogen as part of that research arm that the university would like to pursue, and maybe be a location where we can help implement that in the future. That is a tall task that is not going to happen overnight, and perhaps it never happens. But as a research university, we should be pursuing alternatives to natural gas and other ways to provide thermal heat and energy. So that's all kind of rolled up into the climate action plan, but I can stop there for questions.
Well, if I could respond, I'd say that the question is, are we going to take a proactive stance and try to make alternative energy sources come? Like, for example, try to get companies to build new wind turbines in the Great Lakes, for example. Or are we going to be passive and just sort of wait for these things to appear? What concerns me about references to things like hydrogen is it seems like it's basically fairy dust. I mean, people have been talking about hydrogen for at least 40 years, and it's basically barely moved off of zero, right? What's causing the dramatic improvement of the price of renewable energy is exponential growth. Solar energy is doubling globally every 1.5 years. Wind is doubling globally every 2 years. Those things that have exponential growth are viable candidates, right? But things like hydrogen, they are not doubling. They're just doing nothing, right? And so I feel like that if we're going to make a plan for some kind of medium-term transition to renewable energy, these plans have to be reality-based and not the sprinkling of fairy dust like hydrogen.
You raise a good point. I would say that the addition of windmills and solar plants do nothing to transition thermal needs. And the university has been on record in, the public policy arena to change at least the state's approach, particularly to wind energy and getting a better, more rational policy towards setbacks that the state has set up as a hurdle. So university has weighed in a positive way in that regard in the past, obviously to no avail. That's an ongoing debate at the state legislature. I'm sure all of you are aware of the implications of House Bill 6 and other past policies that kind of have inhibited renewable energy growth. But at the end of the day, additional solar and additional wind capacity in the state does not help solve our thermal issues.
Sorry, Jeff, go ahead. And then let me just tee up. I know Ken Lee and Enrico Bonello also had questions, so let me tee them up. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so I have a question. Well, I guess a few questions about the ability for Ohio State to generate its own, supply its own demand on campus. I know that there have been assessments of photovoltaics on rooftops and where we could put them and so on. And I know that, under the South Oval, we have a whole bunch of geothermal, basically heat pumps, which on one hand provides some of the heating demand. I'm wondering if, I don't know if it's Scott or Mike or her, if you can put those in context. So, the geothermal wells are this many, cover this area. They provide this much of our demand. What is the potential absent really changing how our campus, looks and the buildings to put rooftop PV and so on. And just that context, I think, would be useful.
Yeah, I'll take a stab first, Jeff. So the geothermal, great technology, but a couple things we have to take into account is the real estate that's available and suitable for geothermal at Ohio State, and the subsurface conditions. If any of you are aware of the sort of what we encountered when they did the South Oval geothermal field, There were some, and maybe they're on this call, there were some faculty members who warned us this would happen. And in fact, it did. So lots of fractured stone below ground. And the original geothermal was going to be for multiple uncased wells. As those wells were getting drilled, they started telegraphing amongst one to the other because of all the fractured subsurface stone. That required all of the wells then to be cased all the way down. So a $4 million project became a $12 million project. But that said, now it's operational, it's doing great, but it's still only, you know, that, 3 acres of 600 wells provides about a third of the heating and cooling load for the South Campus dorms only, and the Ohio Union. So if you sort of extrapolate that out, how much real estate would we need and at what cost, you begin to quickly see that we don't have it. You know, you could move out to West Campus where there's lots of real estate, but then you're so far away from, you know, you're at the source, but you're so far away from the sink that by the time you transport it there, you've lost the efficiencies again. On the solar, we've looked at a lot of roofs on campus. When we did the project on the RPAC, which is really just for, you know, it was just a PR piece, really. It's very small. It doesn't produce enough electricity to light the racquetball courts that it covers. But we had to look at 40 different roofs on campus to find one that was oriented properly, wasn't already covered with mechanical equipment, and was engineered to take the load. A lot of, you know, we're a state institution, so when value engineering comes in, roofs often become engineered only for snow load and no excess. We were several years ago going to put one on the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, but the roof was not engineered to take the load. It's perfectly oriented roof, both sides. That roof was recently upgraded, so it's now suitable for solar. But the solar resource sort of rooftop, I think the climate action plan targets, I think 10 megawatts, 10 megawatts. I think it'll be tough to find 10 megawatts of rooftop or parking garages or parking lots. But even if we do that, you have to recall, we are currently a 115 megawatt peaking university, and we're getting ready to add a proton therapy facility that it alone will add 10 megawatts to our demand. It'll be the most energy intensive small building on campus. Then we're going to add the new hospital, you know, the new hospital tower, which current projections are that'll add another 5 to 8 megawatts. So our demand is increasing, and no on-campus solution yet seems entirely viable for a big solution. I think what I like about the climate action plan, it's do what you can where you can. You know, take the benefits you can get where you can get them. I think that's why we think CHP, which does some savings, it's not huge to Dr. Beavis's point of view, absolutely not huge, but it's some. And it's better than taking none today. But we even looked at wind turbines on campus, and the FAA stepped in and said none on campus because it's the urban environment and there are too many heliports nearby. So a wind turbine on campus would have had to have been under 150 feet, which makes it not very effective. But I trust that Alina and Mike and their team are going to keep pushing us to find new solutions. But I'm not confident that on-campus generation shy of natural gas or hydrogen, if it ever comes, will ever really work to meet our demand.
Let's go to Ken, then Enrico, then Leah.
Thanks, Alina. You know, our brief mention of both national and global policy brings me to the local policy at Ohio State. We currently have a sustainable design and construction university policy from the Office of Administration and Planning that's actually open for comment right now through October 11. Is there any relationship of this project to our existing or revised design, sustainable design and construction policy? And is there a need for any comment since the policy is being rewritten?
I don't know, Mike or Scott, do you want to, either one could take that one?
Yeah, Ken, I'll take it, but caveat it with saying my opinion. My opinion is it's a much stronger, more detailed design standard. It's not perfect. It's not a great policy because no policy ever is perfect. But I think it's a much better one than the one we had in place. It really drives to efficiencies, both in the construction, but in the operation as well. One of my concerns that I filed comments, and one of my concerns was it seems to allow a pretty big hole for exceptions and waivers. But I think it's a big improvement over where we were with the previous green build policy.
Well, would this current project then fall under an exception and waiver or not?
No, this project, nothing that NG or Ohio State Energy Partners builds would qualify as a waiver. Yeah, they have to meet the requirements. But if the university was building something like, I don't know, a new hospital tower, and for whatever reason, we wanted to put single pane glass on it for just something absurd, there's a process that where we could accept those. And I'm always concerned, as an energy guy, I'm always concerned about exceptions.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Mike, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add
Your speaker again.
Sorry. I would just add that the new proposed policy will help drive more efficient buildings, as Scott referenced, and those targets are targeted to building type. So the more that we can keep demand of energy use down in the buildings that we are building, the less there is the need to utilize the CHP to generate the energy. So, as much support as we can get for, these new standards or more aggressive standards, the better, because then we'll be more efficient overall and need to rely on CHP less.
A very important point that a lot of what's driving this is the new building construction. And that's, if you want to get to the root of much of this, that's where it's at. Enrico?
Yes, hi. Thank you. I am not going to show my face because I was stung by a wasp in my face the other day, and I look like a beat up boxer right now. So it's not a good sight. So first I have a quick question, and I'd like to know what's the expected lifetime of this plant?
Sure. A few timelines. So the expected life of the plant, the calculated life is 30 years. The expected cash positive flow is between year 6 and year 8, and the expected payback is between year 11 and 12. CHP plants in general, I've seen them last, sort of upwards of 40 plus. They usually don't go much longer than that because the turbines wear out, and the turbine is, more than half the cost of the whole structure. So we have really designed this with the notion that this was a once and done building. It's a 30-year life that we've done the net present value calculations on, and that is, but that, at year 11 or 12, we're at net zero and it's paying back full time then.
But that means that we are committing ourselves to producing CO2 and methane for 30, 40 years, right? And I'm wondering what would have happened in 10 years, for example. Would have the technology have changed enough that maybe we wouldn't need something like this? So maybe there's no answer to that. I just want to make sure that we all understand we're committing ourselves to burning gas and producing methane for the next 40 years, perhaps. Now, I know that we're already burning a lot of gas and producing methane through the McCracken plant. Okay, so I'm just thinking in terms of long planning, right? This thinking started 15 years ago, I think you said, Scott. So anyway, it just bothers me that we want to be green, but at the same time, we're committing ourselves to keep burning and producing methane. The other one is a comment on process. I find it very frustrating that we're having this meeting now with the train barreling down the tracks, and we're staring at the train. Construction build starting next week, essentially. I'm in the College of Ag, and the first I heard of this plant when they told me that the facility where I actually do some of my work was going to be torn down. And then it turns out that because the tower is going to be so tall, it's going to shade the greenhouses of Howlett Hall. Those have to be demolished and moved somewhere or something, or rebuilt. So we learned all this less than a year ago. And I know that we faculty don't pay much attention to a lot of things, but this has really been sort of a last minute kind of thing. And I don't know what the value of this meeting is really, other than telling us, here's the train. It seems that we have done things backwards. If you really were interested in hearing from us, this is the wrong time.
Enrico, there was a process that was followed, and I don't know, Scott, if you want to speak to that, but I think you're raising an important point, which is, this train is barreling down, and so I think part of what we should talk about is going forward, how do we do this better, and what needs to change. But Scott, maybe you could address just the process and how it occurred this time around.
Yeah, I'll push back a little bit because, our first information session to the CFES and Vet Med was well over 2 years ago. It's been discussed publicly at the Board of Trustees meeting for over 2 years. It was presented to the University Senate, to the Senate Fiscal, and the College Finance subcommittees. Beginning in 2018, it was presented to Presidents and Provost Council on Sustainability. It was presented to the Energy Advisory Committee, and I myself have stepped into probably 6 different classrooms at request of professors all over campus to do primers on it. So always at Ohio State, we're Ohio State, there's always too much communication and not enough communication. We always somehow, not everybody gets informed that would like to be informed, but we really, from my perspective, if we look back over the past 2+ years, we've really done a lot of discussion on this. The issue of the shading of the greenhouses, the first shading study I have is dated October of 2018. So we could always do it better. And I think, to Alina's point of view, if we can develop better processes, we certainly want to adopt them. But I think we've done quite a bit of communicating on this.
And I know there's several people here with the University Senate. I don't know if anyone wants to make any further comments on that in terms of what that kind of normal process is when something like this comes forward. And again, I'm not trying to say that that's a sufficient process, but certainly one that is in place and is intended to give voice to faculty on these kinds of issues.
Well, we do know that the Board of Trustees contains representatives of the fossil fuel industry and the natural gas industry, for that matter. We know that the state legislature is constantly supporting the fossil fuel industry and is creating laws deliberately to limit the spread of renewable energy. So the question is this process whereby OSU has been discussing with various people, one that really was fair in that it was getting inputs from both sides? Or was it strongly influenced by direct or indirect representatives of the fossil fuel industry?
So Mike, that's a different question. Let me go to Crichton, and he offered to answer the Senate question.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Elena?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was a Senate alternate back when the when OSCP was under consideration and eventually came up for a Senate vote. And I mean, what Scott's saying is true. There was certainly, there were 3 different committees involved with different aspects of that deal. And it was a very substantial deal. But there was considerable lack of transparency in terms of discussing presenting the underlying documents, in particular the so-called concessionaires agreement, which is the master document for this entire thing, with financial details and also engineering details. So yes, it was considered by various committees, but in closed door form. So there was not the kind of discussion that a lot of senators were asking for. And there was very serious concern on the part of many senators that the process was not transparent enough to make an informed decision. And I will maybe remind you or inform you, one or the other, that lack of transparency was such a concern that a former senator retired at the time this was being considered in the Senate had to file a petition with the Supreme Court of Ohio for release of the concessionaires agreement. And Ohio State refused to release that until the day after the vote in the Senate. So that's some historical context for you regarding the Senate. I'll sign off. There's just a comment.
Thanks, Creighton. Leah, I think you're next in terms of a question.
Yeah, I think my question is sort of in line with some of the discussion, and perhaps informed by my status as a junior faculty member who came in right before the whole energy contract with OSAP. And so the thing that I'm wondering is, I've been reading up about this a lot, and people against the chip facility generally charge that no serious research was done about alternative heating technologies. So for instance, the most promising alternative heating method, it seems, and has been used by a few universities and is the thing being promoted by Sierra Club, is a combined heating and cooling system, which is referred to as CHC, which is what Stanford and also Ball State in Ohio have. And then potentially in Midwest or Northeast, combining that combined heating and cooling system with the geothermal exchange for reducing heating needs in the winter, which is when the cooling system will be less able to provide heat to the heating system. But Sierra Club alleges that no study was done at all to address the feasibility of either of these technologies, a CHC or a geothermal. And I guess it seems to me like this must be true because the financing of the chip facility, both the cost of its construction and the cost of its operation, was built into the 2017 contract with OSAP, which is before the chip feasibility study was done in 2018, and it sounds like it was also before discussion was begun with faculty in 2018. So I'm just wondering, sort of from a process standpoint, how is it true that there was no real investigation of alternate methods, particularly maybe these, but in general? And then if that is true, why was there not a more rounded investigation into alternate methods alongside the chip facility?
Yeah, I can take a stab at some of that, Leah. Just to be clear, the CHP facility was not in the concession agreement. It wasn't built into the price. It wasn't a guaranteed project. In the request for qualifications, the university indicated it was interested in analysis on CHP. It wasn't until after the concession agreement was signed that the board decided to ask the company to produce a feasibility study on constructing a CHP facility. That feasibility study, which is public, included analysis of heating hot water, geothermal, solar, wind, but the important point here is it's thermal. It was a thermal equation we had to solve for. If we converted to 100% renewable energy, electricity today, we would still need to burn natural gas. We would still be short of our thermal demand. So that leads us to geothermal and or heating hot water. As we talked about geothermal briefly before, and heating hot water, we are actually deploying that. In fact, the CHP plant will generate heating hot water for all of West Campus. The Stanford solution, which Sierra Club cited, and I'll encourage you to read the cross-examination of the Sierra Club witness, where he very openly admitted he'd done no analysis at Ohio State, had no understanding of Ohio State's load or conditions, nor did he have any understanding of Ohio State's fiscal position. Stanford, when they replaced their system, they had the luxury of one, $500 million, which is what it cost them. And two, they could abandon their steam in place. Because of the way their campus is oriented and set up, they could deploy a heating hot water system in parallel to their steam system. So they didn't have to disrupt, shut off major portions of campus for several months, even up to a year at a time, to deploy this system. Ohio State, which is extremely densely populated, we are very tightly packed. We are one of the most dense universities amongst our peers. So we can't abandon the system in place while we deploy another one, because we need to use the same territory, the same real estate. So that would mean we have to do major disruptions, assuming the cost is no issue, but the cost is always an issue. We would have to figure out a way to, over the course of 2 or 3 years, shut down major portions of campus for heating and then switch those systems. Many of our buildings are so old, you have to, it's a legacy system. We have brick tunnels built, by the prisoners at the Ohio Pen. I mean, we're very old systems. We're replacing them as we can, as it's cost effective. We're putting a heating hot water system in for the new arts district, for instance. Because that's all being torn up, it becomes cost effective. But our estimate is that it would have been far more, beyond the pale of comparison, to do what a place like Stanford did. So a detailed analysis wasn't done because we couldn't get past the probably $500 to $700 million cost to do that.
And to clarify, by the 500, 700, you're referring to the cost of switching from a steam-based system to a water-based system? Is that what you're referring to?
Right, to a wholesale switch like Stanford did to a heating hot water system.
So basically that was just too much of an upfront cost. Like OSU was not willing to consider anything that required that first switch from steam to water because that was too much of an upfront cost for OSU to bear.
It too much of an upfront cost and a logistics and operational issue. It sort of didn't pass sort of the first test of practicability. And we have, in the past 10 years prior to the concession, we've invested a lot of money, right or wrong, in a high pressure superheated steam system. And so we would have been abandoning some portions of the system that are relatively new, that we're still paying debt service on. But that aside, if we switch to heating hot water, we still have the thermal issue of we need steam. Our medical campus and all of our dining facilities and several of our wet labs use steam process. We did a simple analysis of the available technology to do on-site spot production of steam using electricity. And the estimate was it would double the cost of our electricity. It would take us from a $45 million a year annual electric bill to a $90 million annual electric bill. But when we'd be using local steam generators that were not intended to operate 24/7, but really were for backup and fill. because there just isn't a full-scale campus-wide sort of steam production system that, you know, that would serve our current needs, other than from our perspective and from the analysis we got from industry is CHP. And I think that's why Sierra Club still lists CHP as a potential solution in their policy. You know, I don't want to debate why they picked us to go, you know, beyond gas on their campaign, but they still recognize CHP as a viable solution.
Let me, okay, so Ben has a question. I'm also trying to monitor some of the questions in chat. I know there's a question about impacts on air quality, particularly in the, you know, in disaggregate in the immediate vicinity. And I don't know, Scott, if you know anything about that, but if you do, can you share what you know about that? And then we'll go to Ben for his question. Scott, you're muted.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was busy reading the chat questions.
Oh yeah, sorry. The question is about what the impact of the facility would be on air quality and health outcomes, particularly in the immediate vicinity. I think that there was a study done that said that, you know, at an aggregate scale within the county, negligible impact, but I think the concern is more in the immediate area.
Yeah, I'll answer what I know. I'm quickly, as soon as I say environmental impact, I'm a little bit beyond my expertise, but you know, because of the concern raised by Sierra Club, the university did engage an independent environmental analysis, even though it was not required under the law. We did do it, and there were several monitors deployed, as Alina mentioned, Franklin County, but also one at Wexner Medical Center, and one up near 71 on the far east side of campus, and several others. And I'll use the technical term, the results that came back were negligible and didn't rise to the minimum threshold of Ohio EPA. Now we can argue if Ohio EPA has the right requirements or not, but you know, from a university perspective, those were the guidelines that we sought to follow.
Thanks. Ben, you had a question? And,
yeah, I had a couple
ahead.
comments and a question. I just want to go back to the reference to Senate and what Crichton was referring to as the agreement to lease our energy to begin with, not so much the CHP. And I think that there have been several years of some discussions about CHP through various Senate committees. But the one other point I want to make is that my understanding is that the retiring of an inefficient boiler at McCracken on that day one will actually result in some real carbon benefits right from the start, and because of the how that is that boiler is I guess inefficient. But the real point I want to make, and I guess the question is related to the role of ENGIE in all of this. And my understanding is that we're really in a good position to sort of leverage expertise from a company that is sort of a worldwide leader in some of these energies, the CHPs, and interests in reducing carbon through various investments that they've made in alternative energies, and that we're sort of in a privileged position, I would say, to in this partnership with ENGIE, that we can advantage to be a leader ourselves. I guess there was no question at all. I just had 3 comments.
Well, I think it's right that ENGIE is a global leader in renewable energies and reducing carbon, and that's what they're staking their business model on. So we are absolutely lucky to have them as a partner. You know, it does bring up, I think, broader issues, and it kind of comes back to the question I think that Mike's raised earlier on, which is, is, how can Ohio State be a leader? I mean, I think we all feel, conflicted about the extent to which this is really Ohio State leading versus this is Ohio State simply trying to manage its energy systems and processes in a way that is being respectful and responsive to multiple considerations. Certainly financial cost is a big one, but also respectful of the sustainability goals that the university has set in terms of emission reductions. But it's not a clear-cut thing, and it leaves everybody with just questions about, is this really, how much are we really leading? And what can we do, if this is, essentially a necessary step, as I kind of understand it, this is, Scott, as you were explaining it, something that we probably should have done 5 or 10 years ago. We just didn't have the ability, or maybe it was the willpower to figure out how to do it. But had we done it 5 or 10 years ago, everyone would have applauded it as a very energy efficient, forward-thinking move, and we would have been a leader probably at that point. I think we find ourselves a little stuck now, and I think this is absolutely something the university needs to do. We're playing catch up, and we need to do it. But I think the real question, for me at least, is how can we do better in the future in terms of being out there and being a leader and being proud of our university in terms of the choices that we're making and how we're leading the nation. And that goes well beyond energy. I mean, this is really, for me, a question about how can we be leading on the sustainability transformation that absolutely has to be occurring in our world. And so that's a broad question, and that's not a question we're going to answer in the remaining 15 minutes of this session. But I would love to figure out a way that we can have follow-up dialogue on those questions.
I think part of it has to be making a plan to do better that is real and is not a sort of a greenwashing fiction. Like, for example, any plan that places a lot of emphasis on hydrogen is not real. I mean, it's just not going to be an option anytime soon. You watch the energy transitions all over the world. Maybe in 20 years, hydrogen will be a thing, but wind is growing exponentially, so is electricity. That's real, right? Getting rid of steam heating, that's real, right? Is it going to be cheaper to replace the steam heating in the future than it would be now? That's an interesting question, right? Because if we're going to go green, we've got to get rid of the steam heating. Well, why is it that we can't do it now, but we could do it in the future? Is that because it'll be cheaper to replace steam heating in the future than it would be now? Or is it really because it's really all about finances, not at all about green, right? Engie has a history of doing renewable energy projects, but not here, right? It's burning gas. That's not, no one in this country or elsewhere has a reputation for being a green energy company because they're burning gas. That was a good idea 15 years ago. It's not a good idea now. Now we understand how bad the leaks are. We know that gas is actually probably as bad as coal when you take all of the leaks into account. So what I'm hoping is to see honest questions, not deflections. Well, we can't change the steam heating to water because it'd be too expensive. Does that mean forever or only now? Where is the timeline in this? What is the plan? What is the timeline in the plan? What has to be done with the heating? What has to be done with insulation? What about changing the energy source? How do you stop burning the gas? Otherwise, we just become one more corporation in the tragedy of the commons. We are going to take care of our immediate financial interests and screw the global economy and everybody else, right? So I'm really hoping that we can get away from deflecting these discussions about green energy and actually engaging in the construction of realistic plans that gets the OSU into a leadership position and not someone that is being dragged resistantly, fingernails in the ground, in the general direction of the correct direction.
But I think those are challenging words. I don't think they're all accurate, but they're certainly provocative. I don't know, Scott, would you like to respond? I think the question, you raised many questions, Mike, and we're not going to get to all of this. But, you know, one of the issues is OSU is trying to lead on some things, and but it can't be a leader on everything. And so, you know, we have to try to figure out where are those best opportunities to be a leader. Scott, what other things would you like to respond with on that one?
Yeah, I mean, provocative, true, but I agree with everything Mike has said essentially. But I think we actually do have a very proactive plan. But it's taking measures now that we can, instead of waiting until we can afford it. Maybe in 10 years we could afford, I don't know, but I'm just making that up. But I don't want to wait 10 years to save a unit of carbon that I can save tomorrow. We have a university-wide plan to deploy heating hot water as projects are built or renovated. So we're seeing those in the Med Center district. We're seeing those in the Arts district. We're seeing that on West Campus. Each of those will lead to new efficiencies. We're installing heat recovery chillers both in our central plants and our buildings wherever possible to make use of what is currently wasted heat. But I think where we clearly are leading, I had not seen any university anywhere in the world commit $250 million in investment to just making its conditioned space more efficient. We are well on pace to break through our 25% efficiency goal. In the first 3 years of the concession agreement, we're at about 7% improvement, and that's before any of the major ECM projects actually are fully installed and kick in. So I think we are doing some very proactive things, but I think it makes sense to do what you can now and then do again what you can later.
Let's see, I'm monitoring chat. Barry, did you have a question about heat pumps, or was that just part of the earlier discussion? He might not be there right now. Jeff, you said you have another question.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to frame it, so I'll try. You know, I've worked on energy issues for almost 2 decades now at a couple of national U.S. Department of Energy national labs and here at Ohio State and a few other universities. And, you know, over the past, you know, Mike is right, over, you know, wind and solar are deploying quite readily. At least the costs have come down and enabled by a whole bunch of complicated things, the price of natural gas and the availability of it being one of those. I'm wondering, you know, a couple decades ago, the prognosis for wind and solar deployment was not anywhere close to what's happening right now. And I'm wondering if we can set in motion or try to set in motion the mechanisms so that other, you know, constraints that we face right now, whether it's hydrogen or biogas or whatever, might also be as readily deployed in a couple decades. It's hard to project what will happen with energy, and the Energy Information Administration constantly projects and constantly, in the case of wind and solar, has undershot. You know, I think that we might be able to expect that there's undershoot in expectations that of projections on other options as well. I haven't been here for a couple decades. I don't know who has, but has there been discussion about the prognosis for things a couple decades ago being able to transition as much as we've seen? It's a long statement with a little question appended at the end to try and turn it into a question.
there have been some studies that suggest that the capacity for wind energy in the Great Lakes is somewhere between 2 and 4 gigawatts. So for example, if OSU could play some active role in pressuring the state to do whatever is necessary to develop that enormous energy resource, then this would be a way out of the box, right? That we could start, because here in Ohio, probably wind's always going to be rather more important than solar. I mean, they're both important, right? They're both important, but wind is especially important here. And the Great Lakes is one of the great undeveloped wind energy environments around. So if we could somehow force the state's hand to let that happen, then that would be great. You know, and I also think that we need to stop thinking about on-campus resources. It's sort of like, you know, it's not real. I mean, no very large corporation that wants to go green does it by building solar panels on just their campus. It's about engaging with companies that do huge facility scale solar systems and huge facility scale energy systems and huge battery pack systems, right? And so if we say, look, we want partners in the energy industry that are going to develop large wind farms and develop large solar farms, and we're going to give them our business, that would be a positive impact. I mean, I'm not as far away from Scott as most of you probably think. I mean, we've had a lot of good chats. I know that he's working in a pretty constrained box, right? I mean, especially financial constraints. He doesn't really have the freedom to move away from those constraints. And I think Scott basically agrees with a lot of my positions too. The problem is, how do we get from here to there? And so what we don't want to do is waste time arguing about things that are not real, like, well, we can't build all the solar panels on campus. Of course we can't build the solar panels on campus. There's not enough area, right? We would have to build larger systems. We would have to have partners. But if we can bring that about, then we can be moving in the right direction and not just be a continuing member of the tragedy of the commons.
I wondered if Scott or Mike, you could say something about that question of, you know, what's our ability to purchase, you know, in these, like we've done with the wind agreement. I mean, what's the ability for us to do more of that kind of stuff?
The ability is there, 100%. To Mike's point of view, though, if we want to lead, if we want to do something, it's the distance between that grid scale facility and campus that we need to, in my personal opinion, after 30 years in this business, we need to focus our attention and policy weight to. So our wind energy, and I can share this because the price is public for wind energy. Our wind energy costs us about $50 a megawatt where it's produced. By the time it gets transmitted, transmission and distribution, and PJM adders and local riders, once it gets to campus, we pay over $70 for that. So the issue is, from my perspective, is not the generation of the commodity. Wind, I can buy wind and solar all day today, as much as we need, for sub $40, rock bottom prices. Probably, if I looked really hard, I might be able to get sub $30 per megawatt hour. 5 years ago, unheard of. But at $30 a megawatt hour delivered to campus, I'd pay 65 because of the transmission and distribution and the capacity charges and the bill riders and the reliability surcharges and the universal surcharges and all those things that we pay are now often more than 50% of the total energy bill. So even if I buy cheap energy, it becomes expensive when I get it here. That's why the CHP provides such a positive net present value, because I don't have to pay any of the the transmission and distribution costs because it's behind the meter, it's on campus. So while the energy may be similar in price, the commodity itself, it's the savings by not having to deal with the charges that are inherent in the public grid. So that's really where I'm a pessimist about the ability to change policies like this, because it becomes such a revenue stream for so many state and federal entities. But it's really about the transmission and distribution. It's not about where there's a facility. There are facilities either planned in construction or could be constructed all over the state of Ohio and in this region that we could buy from. Absolutely.
Yeah, a good price for large wind turbines now in Great Lakes or in the oceans would be between $20 and $25, right?
Yep.
So like half of what you're talking about. And as those, whereas these kind of exponential growths and chips are always about getting smaller and smaller. Strangely, with wind turbines, it's all about getting bigger and bigger. So when you can go into like the Great Lakes, you can have these wind turbines that are like 300 feet high. Then you're starting to get low energy. And of course, there are barriers towards the flow of the energy, the transmission of the energy. But in part, these are political barriers. And in part, they're deliberate political barriers. And that's where I think that OSU should use its enormous political clout to press back, not just accept that system. After all, in Britain now, they have moved from powering cities by coal to entire cities by wind. And they built those in the North Sea, which is a damn sight more difficult than building something in the Great Lakes. And they had all these strange transmission requirements too, but they've overcome it. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? And I believe that we've got to look outside of this box that the system wants to keep us in and figure out how do we pressure this on every front. Pressure efficiency, which I agree we're doing a good job, pressure on the energy sources, pressure on its transmission, push back against the legislature when it deliberately does things with the sole purpose of preventing the spread of green energy, right? So that we finally become a leader in this movement and not, somewhat reluctant follower.
Can I name a 5-second example of this? Because I think it's really relevant here. So when Stanford did invest in this combined heating and cooling technology, and it relies on the rest of its heat and energy comes from the electrical grid, it renegotiated the way that it was buying energy from the state. And then over time, the state has actually changed, sort of partly it was heading that way, and partly Stanford, sort of by pushing the way that they were buying their energy, has changed the makeup of the electricity in that local area. And I think when I read both Alina and my father, Mike Beavis's dispatch articles here, I was really struck by this exact thing, that it felt like both of them were talking about us being sort of agentless actors in Ohio. And I think Stanford, and there are, I'm sure, other examples, show that universities don't need to be agentless. And I think equally important to that, Stanford came up with a lot of really interesting engineering technologies and innovation on the path to building that plant. They built new engineering, and they also created new predictive technologies for predicting the various types of need for heating and cooling. And I think if we align ourselves with a company, and I realize I don't have students who are funded by this company, I do not have labs that are being funded by this. When we align ourselves with the interests that make it very easy to not innovate, but instead to go with the existing things, it reduces the room and the need for innovation, and then therefore reduces the room and the need for pushing new policies. And I see those hand in hand. And I think Stanford is a great example of doing the one, and I wish OSU could be an example of that too.
So Leo, we should talk more about that. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying about a lack of incentive to innovate, and I get where you're coming from. It's an interesting case because it's a little bit of the opposite too, in the sense that NG has allowed us to do things that we otherwise couldn't have done. And probably the biggest thing on the innovation front is the Energy Innovation Center that's being built, will be started to be built soon, and is going to allow incredible innovation to go on the campus that will also transfer to the campus itself. So I understand, conceptually where you're coming from. The practical reality is that NG is actually allowing us to do some things we otherwise couldn't do. But I think first of all, let me just say thank you. We're kind of out of time now, but it's been a great discussion. I greatly appreciate everybody joining and taking the time and sharing the passion that you have. And I really would like to figure out a way to go forward on this. And Mike, I think you're giving us, you know, a lot of great, posing a lot of great questions. And you know, I would love it if there were a group of faculty that were interested in staying engaged in pursuing some of this.
Very quickly, Alina, this is Enrico again, and going to what Leah was just talking about. Perhaps the result would have been very different if there was a real engagement of faculty at the university at the onset. Because maybe that's what happened at Stanford. Maybe they came up with great ideas because they had engagement at the outset with people who are passionate and know what they're talking about. Here it's been the opposite. It's been a reverse process where now we're being informed of what's happening basically.
Enrico, that's just not the case. Faculty have been engaged all along. In fact, formally engaged as part of the Energy Advisory Committee. Just to be clear, NG, as our partner, is incented to reduce our energy use. It's more in their incentive for us to use less energy than not. So we are not aligned with them. We asked them to develop a feasibility study for a CHP plant. But the less energy we use, the better they are. They actually have an incentive in the concession agreement that would award them a bonus if they can bring our efficiency, our consumption down faster than we expected. So I do think it's a good partnership. I think that's why many other universities are examining it and others have adopted it. There are always issues, no doubt. We are good partners, but we're both vigilant and we both watch each other very carefully. I think it sells both sides short to say something as general as we're aligned with them or they with us. It's really a collaborative, both the company, the university administration, university faculty, and frequently third party outside analysis. We really have tried to come to these decisions in a thoughtful, meticulous, and sort of well-mannered way. It's not perfect, never has been. We can always improve. But I think it is the result of a whole lot of people applying a whole lot of thought, often conflicting thought, and trying to reach resolution.
To be clear, I'm not impugning your goodwill and the ways, you know, you've been trying things. I'm just saying that perhaps freeing up more intellectual energy at the outset could have resulted in a different outcome. That's all I'm saying.
I guess, so I would like to hop in just quickly to Scott, your comment too. So I posted a separate question, but I'd be curious, you know, since the question has been posed to us of how to do it better, I'm curious whether Scott or Elena can help us understand what you might be doing differently based on the input you're hearing, because I do feel like there's a little bit of like, here's a bunch of conversations that have happened. I listened in on this, you know, the PUCO meetings as well. And I feel like it's often presented as kind of, we've made this decision and now we're doing these public hearings. So I would love to, you know, find out that that's not the case and that you all are listening and that you will be making some adjustments and or improving the process from, because I don't feel like I have the power to actually make the changes. I see a lot of ways that, so I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I see a ton of ways that we could be contributing and or helping move the discussion forward, and thinking about GIS analyses that would look at what communities could be impacted from natural gas extraction. You know, I personally am interested in the communities that we're affecting because I think we could be a leader in that space. There's a lot of other things I could continue saying, but I would love to hear what you all are actually taking away from this conversation rather than maybe just what feels like potentially placating the conversation of like, okay, they've been heard, now we can move on. So hopefully that comes across as, I mean that respectfully, so I apologize if that doesn't sound that way, but I really am looking for leadership from you all as well.
No, that sounds totally respectful. Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, it's totally respectful, and I appreciate it. And I think Crichton and Mike will tell you, it's not placating at all. I welcome and entertain rigorous and robust debate. As Mike mentioned, I actually agree with a lot of stuff he said. That doesn't necessarily give me the tools, though, to manage it. How we do it better, that's really something I have to turn back on you guys. You know, I am just, you know, an administration person at the university. In my perspective, after, you know, I've been here 18 years, I've never seen another project that was more, that I thought was more vetted to more constituencies than this one. You know, even 3 different public discussions at the Board of Trustees is sort of unheard of. But an energy advisory committee, a presentation to Senate Fiscal, to President's Council, to the COPE. So in some sense, I think we, as in the administration, may take too much comfort in assuming that those organizations who are tasked with getting out their message to their constituents are doing it. But, you know, I don't know how to improve that. Maybe everything needs to go to a town hall meeting. I don't know, but I'm certainly willing to engage in any conversation. I think that's the only way we find out better ideas. That was why I mentioned the geothermal field. Had we engaged and listened better, and I can say this because I wasn't here when that problem developed, it might have not have been a $12 million project. It might have been a $4 million project because we would have known what a particular faculty member was already telling us.
Can I, so Alita, first of all, I really appreciate the questions. I think what I'm taking away from this is that there are 3 potential areas of interest that we could be working in. One has to do very specifically with the CHP and the impacts, the potential impacts of the CHP, and to be doing research on that, including, though, engaging, you know, with communities, as you expressed in chat, but also thinking about other impacts. And we can certainly have the expertise to do that kind of stuff here. The second is, I think, stepping back, a question about decision-making process. I think we all understand what the decision-making process is broadly, you know, in terms of these kinds of capital projects that go through the university Senate process, and that is an opportunity for faculty to weigh in. You know, but I think there's still a fair question here about, for these kinds of decisions that really, you know, is I think we all feel there are, this is a bigger, there are more dimensions to this than just simply building a building. You know, there are ethical and moral and trade-off kinds of questions here that are big questions. And, you know, if we really want to be authentic members of our campus community, we need to seriously ask those questions and allow an opportunity for them to be debated. And so there's something about, I think, what do we learn from this decision-making process? And it has left, I think, many people feeling, yeah, we can point to the process. There was a process, but was it really a good enough process? And are there other things we could do? So that's the second thing. The third thing I would say is, you know, what can we do as a faculty who have strong interests and feel passionate about pushing towards a renewable energy future in the state of Ohio? And what kind of voice could we have? Where might we engage with the legislature or with others? And I'm out of my realm when I'm speaking that, because I don't, you know the answers to that, but there are certainly people on campus who can help us with that and who can help us figure out where we might have a strong voice and an opportunity to really make a difference in the kinds of ways that, you know, Mike was talking about. I mean, could we start advocating for, you know, wind energy in the Great Lakes? That would be a pretty exciting, you know, thing. I don't know the answer to that question, or maybe there's other things that we could be doing that would be more effective. I just don't know. But I mean, I think that that's a third area in which, if there's interest, you know, we could be doing work in. So that's what I'm taking away from this.
I agree that getting outside of the box is often, people talking, you know, get outside of the box thinking, but I mean, it's really about constraints, right? So for example, Scott operates under very strong fiscal constraints. I mean, his bosses are not going to like it if he suggests an alternative that costs $200 million more, right? But where does that leave us? It leaves us that OSU is really doing very little in terms of the climate. OSU is not a green leader in Ohio. In terms of the NG, Creighton said, well, basically the faculty consultation for the idea of should we outsource energy to NG was entirely nominal. It is clear after the fact that the university administration had almost no interest in what the faculty thought, which is why they gave them the facts of the document the day after the vote was taken, right? So I think that this chip disaster, this chip situation is not like that bad. I mean, it could have been worse, right? It could have been, this is not an absolutely world-leading disaster in terms of energy. But also we have to reflect on the fact that it's not much of a green success either, right? The OSU is, it's taking care of business. It's not going to lose a lot of money. It's not pouring out, carbon as quite as badly as it was, but it's hardly a green success. This is not a success story. This is not OSU leading the state towards a greener future and saving our climate system, which, by the way, translates into saving our economy, right? So this business of where is the box and are we trapped in the box? Are we aware that we're trapped in the box? This business of the transmission costs, I think, is an example of a box. We may have to climb out of that box and attack it in order to make real progress. If we accept it as a boundary condition, we're hemmed in. There's not much that we can do, which is why we are where we are.
Well, at this point, we are over time. I would welcome suggestions on how to follow up from this. And I shared my impressions in terms of where this conversation is leading me. I am open, and I think others, who are other faculty affiliated with the Sustainability Institute would be open and eager to try to figure out what's a good follow-up from this is. There are some immediate constraints, but longer term, these constraints can be opportunities. And I think we should really try to push on what we can do. I will leave it at that and really thank everybody for a really open, honest conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity to do this. Scott, thank you so much for your time and willingness to engage. Mike as well. Please, everyone, keep in touch and let's follow up and figure out where to go from here. I would welcome that. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Scott.
Bye-bye.